Hello everyone, welcome to EPG Pathshala. This is Dr. Mahabir Narwal, Professor Department of Commerce, Kurukshetra University, Kurukshetra. In this module, the topic for discussion is learning. First of all, what are the points to be covered in this module? These are learning objectives, introduction, features of learning, objective of learning, principles of learning, learning process, making learning effective, learning theories, learning and behavior modification. So first of all, what are the objectives of this module? To understand the meaning of learning, to understand the feature and objective of learning, to know the process of learning, to know the theories of learning. Introduction. In simple words, through experience, practice or training, it is a modification of behavior. A permanent change can be led by learning in one's behavior. Addition or subtraction to new information may be called learning. Either directly or indirectly, all human behavior is affected by learning. Learning occurs every time, every day. We all face new experience. We learn something from a new situation or a new event. We can't see learning itself, but we can see changes. Learning has 4 components. First, practice or experience must be reinforced in order for learning to occur. The behavior will eventually disappear if reinforcement doesn't accompany the practice or experience. Second, not every change in an individual is learning. Change should be permanent for learning. It is not change when the change is temporary. Third, learning is not always reflected in performance. Learning includes change, although from an organization point of view, the change may be good or bad. 4. Behavior caused from maturation, physical damage, or disease doesn't include learning because change in behavior should occur as a result of practice, training, or experience. Let us discuss few definitions of learning. According to Hilgert's, learning is a relatively permanent change in one's behavior that occurs as a result of prior experience. According to Gehi, learning has taken place if an individual behaves, reacts, or responds as a result of experience in a different ways. According to Garin, learning involves change, though not necessarily improvement in one's behavior. According to Costello, learning can be defined as a relatively permanent change in behavior that occurs as a result of experience or reinforced practices. What are the features of learning? From the analysis, we have many features of learning, like learning gives satisfaction. With a particular objective, generally we learn. It gives us satisfaction when the objective of an individual achieved. Learning creates changes. We can't say it learning when an individual learns something and there is no change. Learning brings changes in the behavior of a person. For example, an employee starts working in a good way after his training in which he worked with better system of working. We can't say it learning if there is no change in the employee working after the training. Learning affects behavior. Learning affects an individual's behavior. If someone learns something, it reflects in his behavior. Whatever is learned by a person changes his behavior. Learning creates permanent changes. Learning is permanent in nature. If an employee forgets after getting training to work, we can't say it is learning. Learning is when obtained knowledge in training used by an employee for a long time. Learning is related with all activities. A person in his life can learn anything in his life, there is nothing like that a person can learn only some particular activities. Learning must be felt. We can't say it learning if the learning of a person is not reflect in his behavior. Learning should reflect in a person's behavior. For example, an employee learned the management principles, but his behavior doesn't reflect it. It is not learning. Learning is a continuous activity. We learn something by whatever we do in our life. Learning has no age or fixed time. Learning is a continuous process. Learning is not always for the betterment. If a person learns some stealing techniques, it is also learning, but this is negative. Learning is intangible. Learning can't be seen but can be felt in a person's behavior. For example, a person has learned teaching. The art of teaching can be felt when he is teaching but can't be seen. Its repetition is a must. To make the learning permanent, it has to be repeated again. If there is no repetition of acquired learning, it will destroy. To help the employees in getting acquired learning permanent, some rewards can be given. Like in the organization, employees can be told that if they achieve the particular target, the reward will be given. Objectives of learning. The major objectives of learning are: learning may allow the development of new interest. After learning, one can communicate with confidence and clarity. After learning, better decisions can be taken. One's attitude and modification may be modified with positive learning. Learning is a best incentive to understand and develop oneself. Principles of learning. In organization behavior, the learning is an important factor. Some of the principles of learning are: principle of exercise. According to principle of exercise, if the learned activity repeated by the person, it gets strengthened. According to this principle, if the learned activity repeated again and again, it gets fixed in the mind of the learner. Principle of effect. In this principle, there are one effect of the activity: either it satisfies an individual or it dissatisfies. If the person is satisfied, he will repeat the activity, or if he is dissatisfied, he will not repeat the activity. So we can say that an individual learns some activity because these activities give him satisfaction. Principle of discrimination. According to the principle of discrimination, an individual learns to respond negatively or positively between two situations. For an example, if 6 subordinates work under a manager in a similar environment and have same ability, 3 out of them are working with the dedication and other 3 are poor worker. A positive response will be there for the former workers and negative response for the later from the manager side. A manager will behave in similar way with all subordinates if he doesn't learn anything from present situation. As a result, there will be no improvement in the inferior work of the worker. Principle of generalization. The principle of generalization is different from the principle of discrimination. Two situations are observed as same in the principle of generalization, while the difference between two situations is observed in the principle of discrimination. In this principle, if an activity or a situation takes place in future which was already happened before, the response of the person will remain the same in both situations. Both the situations are similar for the person. Principle of extinction. In this principle, the response will obsolete if result is not connected with the response. For example, if a manager don't appreciate his subordinate for their work, don't motivate them, they will feel demotivated. And if the manager appreciates or gives award to his subordinates, they will feel motivated and they will work hard and learn more. Learning process. Psychologists suggested that there are four essential steps for an effective learning. Stimulus. Stimuli are which draw the attention of people like objects and language. It is desirable to have a stimulus which must be clear to the learner. From superior action, employees get stimuli and employees pay attention to that stimuli about which superior advise them. Stimuli provide quality performances. Employee must be clear about the benefits to be given by the management. Response. The response represents the act which learner has to perform. The positive response of employees must be encouraged and appreciated by the management. Motivation. Motivation must be there for effective learning. If people don't want to learn, they will not learn until they are motivated. Reward. An employee must be rewarded time to time so that learning can be effective and permanent. No reward if there is no learning. Rewards may be monetary or non-monetary. A non-monetary reward includes job satisfaction, status recognition, and task achievement, and monetary rewards include rewards in money term. How can we make learning effective? Psychologists suggested following essentials to make a learning process effective. Sufficient time must be required for proper learning and its implementation. Participative, appropriate, and modern learning techniques must be used. Learner must positively enjoy satisfaction from process of learning. For learner, there should be clear and personal guidance. Learner must be motivated and prepared to learn. Now let us discuss the theories of learning. There are different processes by which one acquired different patterns of behavior of learning. The major theories of learning are classical conditioning theory, operant conditioning theory, cognitive learning theory, social learning theory. First of all, classical conditioning learning theory. When we think about the classical conditioning theory, one name that comes to our mind is Russian psychologist Ivan Pavlov. For his early experiments on the subject, Pavlov won the Nobel Prize. In classical conditioning theory, ineffective object or situation becomes so much effective that it makes the hidden response apparent. Pavlov conducted experiment on dogs where he established a stimulus response. With the dog's salivation, Pavlov tried to relate the ringing of a bell. When Pavlov showed a piece of meat, the dog exhibited a remarkable increase in salivation. On another hand, when he rang a bell, the dog had no salivation. Then Pavlov linked the meat and ringing the bell. When again and again hearing the bell before getting food, the dog began to salivate as soon as the bell rang. When he did this for many times, he rang the bell without showing the meat. This time the dog salivated and learned to respond to the bell alone. In the mind of the dog, Pavlov could establish a relationship of two stimuli, the meat and the bell. By conditioning, response of salivation could be seen after ringing the bell even when no meat was present. Most modern theorists agree that it represents a very small part of total human learning. In particular, Skinner felt that this theory explains only relaxing behavior. Skinner felt that human behavior can't be explained by classical conditioning alone, and most human behavior affects or operate on the environment. Second learning theory is operant conditioning theory. an alternative approach known as operant conditioning proposed by B.F. Skinner. Behavior is not likely to be repeated if the consequences are not favorable. The term operant indicates that the organism operates in its environment to generate consequences. The relationship between consequences and response summarizes quite concisely a basic learning process that occurs over time, in which a person changes his behavior based on his past experience. Skinner did the same what Pavlov did. The theory argued that behavior is a function of its consequences. In organizations, there can be many examples of operant conditioning learning process. For example, a company manager assures his subordinates that he would suitably reward those people who will meet the extra target. When the evaluation time comes, the manager doesn't fulfill his assurance. Next time, the subordinates will decline the order when managers request them to do so. If the manager rewards the worker for his hard work, the worker will work with enthusiasm. Operant conditioning techniques are extensively used in clinical and educational research. Control of alcoholism and control of deviant children in a classroom. Third learning theory is cognitive learning theory. Cognitive means an individual's interpretations, knowledge, thoughts, understanding, ideas about himself and his environment. In both above mentioned theories, it is found that classical and operant conditioning results in a stimulus response situation. The cognitive theory of learning differs from classical conditioning and operating conditioning theory. Learning is assumed to be a function of stimulus response connections. In conditioning theory, learning is assumed to be a function of stimulus response connections. In cognitive theory, the role of an organism in memorizing, receiving, retrieving, and interpreting stimuli and reacting is recognized and emphasized. Cognitive learning theory emphasizes that learning is considered as the outcomes of deliberate thinking about aims at goal achievement and problem or situation based upon known facts. Basically, the theory based on Mr. Tolman's experiment, where he used rats in a laboratory to show that rats have learned to run through a complicated maze towards their goal of food. He observed that rats developed expectations at every choice point at the maze. Thus, they learned to expect that certain cognitive cues related to the choice point could ultimately lead to food. According to Mr. Tolman, in an organization set up, some training program can be designed to strengthen cues such as workers' expectations, such as monetary, supervision, other rewards. It was believed that the workers would learn to be more productive by building a relationship between following the directions and by guidelines with expectancy of monetary rewards for these efforts. The last theory is social learning theory. This theory is extension of operant conditioning. The social learning theory, also called observational learning. An individual learns by observing and imitating our models like parents, teachers, bosses, supervisors, colleagues, and successful people. Social learning is when an individual learns from observation and direct experience. To improve human performance in the organization, social learning theory can be applied to human resource management. Process of social learning. Albert Bandura has identified 4 processes for social learning. First, attention process. People only learn from a specific model when they pay attention or recognize the critical features of the model. People influenced more by those models which are attractive, powerful, and successful, and who are important to them. Second, retention process. Effects of the model on an individual lie on the retention power of the concerned individual, even after the model is no longer readily available. Production process. In this process, an individual converts the watching into doing. In this, performance of own action and behavior are matched with those of the model. Reinforcement process. If the incentives or reward are provided to an individual, then he will be motivated to exhibit the modeled behavior. Behaviors that are reinforced will be given more attention and are generally performed more often. Now, learning and behavior modification. The learning process of an individual takes place on the job as well as prior to the job. When an attempt is made by the managers to mold individuals by guiding their learning in graduated steps, he is shaping their behavior. In learning concepts, officers in organizations are concerned with how they can teach employees to behave in a way that is going to give maximum benefits to their organizations. Psychologists have suggested 4 ways for shaping one's behavior: the law of effect, the reinforcement, punishment, extinction. The law of effect. According to this law of effect, several responses made to the same situation, those which are accompanied or closely followed by satisfaction, that is reinforcement, will be more likely to reoccur. Those which are accompanied or more closely followed by discomfort, that is punishment, will be less likely to reoccur. Smart salaries and a good environment make employees smart and vice versa. Negative approach or lack of incentives by the management will bring negative results, and a positive approach and rewards will bring positive result. Reinforcement. It can be defined as anything that both increases the strength of the response and tends to include repetition of the behavior that preceded the reinforcement. Sometimes reinforcement and rewards are used interchangeably. Still, there is difference in these terms. Positive and negative reinforcement. When for the desired behavior in the organization, an employee getting reward is called positive reinforcement. The reward should be like which encourages desired behavior and strengthens the probability of repeating such behavior in future. The most powerful positive reinforcement is money, because it can be used to purchase primary reinforcement like food, clothes, etc. Requirements for the positive reinforcement are: smart compliments and salaries make the performance of employees smart. Immediate reinforcement must be there, and timing for the reward is also important. The reward will be less effective if it is not given on time. Reward should be according to needs of the employees. Negative reinforcement. It is also known as avoidance learning. When individuals learn to avoid or escape from unpleasant condition or circumstances, it takes place. Negative reinforcement is not the same as punishment. Negative reinforcement strengthens and increases behavior, while punishment weakens and decreases behavior. Intrinsic and extrinsic reinforcement. Intrinsic and extrinsic rewards are the two parts of negative reinforcement. In intrinsic reinforcement, rewards are more natural consequences of behavior. This creates a psychologically expected relationship to the behavior itself and touch the employees internally. And extrinsic reinforcement has no direct relationship with behavior itself. It is generally artificial and often arbitrary. Primary and secondary reinforcement. Positive reinforcement can be further classified in two parts, primary and secondary reinforcement. Primary reinforcement known as unconditional reinforcement and secondary reinforcement known as conditional reinforcement. Primary reinforcement is the psychological and basic needs like clothes, food. These satisfied the person and directly reduce his primary motivational drive. Secondary reinforcement depends upon individual and his past reinforcement history. For example, praise, advancement, recognition, application, etc. Extinction. It is applied to reduce unwanted behavior and especially when such behavior was previously rewarded. Extinction is less painful than punishment. It works toward elimination of undesirable behavior. The behavior will probably become less frequent and eventually die out if rewards are withdrawn for behaviors that were previously reinforced. Punishment. It refers to anything which weakens behavior and tends to decrease its subsequent frequency. Nobody wants to be punished irrespective of one's age, sex, status, and caste, color. Use of punishment certainly leads to some undesirable by parents. Punishment must always be done in private and immediately. And above all, punishment should follow everywhere the undesirable behavior occurs with anybody. The aim of punishment should be to make or mold a person, not to break a law. After punishing a person and after seeing some improvements in him, try to be normal with that person. Learning is a permanent feature. Learning must be felt by the learner. Either directly or indirectly, all human behavior is affected by learning. Learning occurs every time, every day, we all face new experience. To make the learning permanent, it has to be repeated again. Learning may allow the development of new interest. If the person is satisfied, he will repeat the activity, or if he is dissatisfied, he will not repeat the activity. In the end of this module, points to ponder. Learning creates permanent changes. Repetition in learning is must. Learning is intangible and gives satisfaction. Learning is a continuous process. Learning must be felt. Thank you.